When I saw the help wanted ad in the paper, I couldn't believe my luck. Night shift security at the new strip club in town, $20 an hour, Wednesday through Sunday. Not bad for someone who spent his weekends fishing or hunting with the guys. I've always been a people person, and at 6 feet 2 inches with a solid build, most folks didn't want to test me. The ad felt like it had my name on it. I showed up at the club for the interview on a rainy Tuesday evening. The place, called Velvet Dreams, was a mix of neon lights and smoky allure. Behind the bar was the boss, Salvatore Sal Russo, a grizzled old-timer with slicked-back silver hair and a thick New York accent. Sal was the type who commanded respect just by breathing. He leaned back in his chair, a cigar perched between his fingers, and sized me up. "You're Tony?" he asked, voice gravelly as the roads I'd drive to get to my favorite hunting spots. "That's me," I said, flashing my best grin. "Think I'd fit the bill?" Sal chuckled, taking a slow puff of his cigar. "You'll do fine, kid. You've got the look, the build. And people like you, huh? That's good. We like friendly muscle around here." He leaned forward, his tone dropping. "Listen, no touching the girls. You see someone getting too handsy? You take care of it. But don't go breaking bones unless I say so. Got it?" I nodded. "Got it." Sal slapped the table. "You're hired. Start tomorrow night." The first night at Velvet Dreams was surprisingly chill. I quickly learned the staff dynamics. The dancers were confident, colorful personalities, each with a story to tell. Iris stood out, a fiery redhead with a wicked sense of humor. Between sets, she'd crack jokes at the bar, and I couldn't help but laugh. She was sharp, quick-witted, and could roast anyone without breaking a sweat. "So, Tony," Iris teased, "you're the new guy, huh? How long you think you'll last? Most of the security guys quit in a week." I smirked. They didn't have my charm or biceps. "Ha, sure," she said with a grin, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "We'll see." It didn't take long to get into the groove of the job. Watching the crowd, keeping an eye on the girls, and dealing with the occasional drunk wasn't too bad. By midnight, I felt like I'd been doing it for years. Things got interesting the second night. A wiry, scruffy-looking guy with more hair on his face than his head parked himself at the stage. He reeked of booze and had that jittery energy of someone who'd been up too long. Despite his ragged appearance, the guy was throwing wads of cash onto the stage like he owned the place. That was fine until his hands started wandering. Iris was performing, and she shot me a pointed look. I got the nod from Sal, and I moved in. "Hey, man," I said, keeping my tone friendly but firm. "No touching the girls. This is your only warning." The guy glared at me, his yellowed teeth bared in a crooked grin. "What are you gonna do about it, big guy?" "Trust me," I said, "you don't want to find out." He backed off, grumbling under his breath, but didn't leave. For the rest of the night, I kept an eye on him. I wasn't sure what his deal was, but he wasn't worth breaking a sweat over. Yet. By the third night, I felt like I had the routine down. Most of the patrons were easy to deal with, and the dancers had warmed up to me. Iris even handed me a drink, non-alcoholic of course, during her break, raising a toast to not being the worst security guy we've had. Around 11:30, I noticed a man in black sitting in the corner, sipping a drink but barely looking at the stage. His eyes were locked on me, cold and calculating. When he finally approached, I squared my shoulders, ready for trouble. "You're new here," he said, his voice low and unsettling. "You'll regret taking this job." Before I could respond, he brushed past me and disappeared into the crowd. The guy gave me the creeps, but I shook it off. Weirdos were part of the package, right? At midnight, things got strange. The music cut out, the lights flickered, and the whole place went silent. Then came the whispers, low, ghostly murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My heart raced as shadows danced along the walls, too fast and unnatural to be caused by the flickering lights. For a brief second, the lights came back on, and I swear I saw pale, translucent figures flitting across the room. The girls screamed, and the patrons looked around in confusion. Sal stormed out of his office, shouting for someone to fix the lights. When everything returned to normal, it was like nothing had happened, but I knew what I'd seen. That night, as I clocked out, Iris stopped me. "You okay?" she asked, her usual humor replaced with genuine concern. "I'm fine," I lied. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. By my 4th night on the job, I was starting to second-guess everything. The whispers, the flickering lights, the figures I thought I saw, none of it made sense. But there was no way I was going to admit I was scared. A guy like me doesn't run from shadows, even if those shadows are something else. Sal had given me a list of rules my first night, written on a crumpled piece of paper. At the time, I thought it was just a weird quirk of his management style. Now, I wasn't so sure. The rules read, no touching the girls, ever. That's your first and final warning. If the lights flicker after midnight, stay where you are and don't move until they stabilize. If you hear whispering and it's not coming from a patron, don't acknowledge it. Never, under any circumstances, go into the basement. If a man in black speaks to you, don't talk back. Just walk away. I didn't ask any questions when he handed me the list, figuring it was just some old superstition or a scare tactic to keep employees in line. Now, though, the rules felt like a lifeline I didn't fully understand. The club was packed again, the kind of crowd that made the place hum with energy. Amid the chaos, I spotted him, the man in black. He was sitting at the same corner table, nursing what looked like a glass of whiskey. His eyes found mine immediately, and he gave me a slow, knowing smirk. Rule number 5 flashed in my mind. Don't talk back. Just walk away. Instead, I held his gaze for a moment too long, defiance bubbling up inside me. It wasn't in my nature to back down from anyone, but the longer I looked at him, the colder the room seemed to get. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned away, forcing myself to focus on the crowd. Around 11 o'clock, a commotion broke out near the stage. A young guy, drunk out of his mind, was trying to climb up to join one of the dancers. She screamed, backing away, and the crowd erupted in laughter. I didn't hesitate. "Hey, buddy, get down," I barked, shoving through the throng of onlookers. The guy laughed, slurring something unintelligible, and tried to grab the dancer's leg. That was it. I climbed onto the stage, grabbed the guy by the collar, and yanked him down. He stumbled, tried to swing at me, but he was too drunk to land a hit. I caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted it, and shoved him toward the door. "Out!" I growled. "Now!" He muttered something about coming back, but I didn't care. By the time I returned to my post, the man in black was gone. That should have been a relief, but it only made my stomach churn. Just before midnight, the same thing happened. The lights flickered, the music cut out, and the whispers started. Rule number 2 echoed in my mind. Stay where you are and don't move until the lights stabilize. The air felt electric, heavy, like a thunderstorm was about to break out inside the club. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, as the whispers grew louder. They weren't just noises anymore. They were words, fragmented and eerie, like a dozen voices overlapping. The lights flared back on for a split second, and I saw them again. Those ghostly figures. They swooped through the air like translucent birds, their forms twisting and contorting in ways that made my stomach lurch. Mike, one of the bartenders, was standing too close to the edge of the bar. Before I could shout a warning, one of the ghostly figures seemed to dive toward him. He flew backward as if hit by an invisible force, crashing into the liquor shelves. Bottles shattered, spilling booze everywhere, and Mike lay on the ground, groaning. "Oh shit," someone yelled. Chaos erupted. Patrons scrambled for the exits, some laughing nervously, others screaming. The girls huddled together on the stage, shaking. Sal stormed out of his office, bellowing over the din. "Everybody out! We're closing early!" I helped Mike to his feet. He looked dazed, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. I don't know what happened," he stammered. "Neither do I muttered, but rule number 3 nagged at me. Don't acknowledge the whispers. Maybe Mike had broken that one without realizing it. After the crowd cleared out, I stayed to help clean up. Iris sat at the bar nursing a glass of water, her usual sass replaced by a haunted look. "You okay?" I asked, leaning against the counter. She nodded slowly, but her eyes betrayed her. "You saw them, didn't you?" she asked. I froze. "Saw what?" "The shadows. The things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've been here since the club opened. I thought I was losing my mind at first, but they're real." Her admission hit me like a punch to the gut. What the hell are they? I don't know, she admitted. Sal won't talk about it. He just tells us to keep working and not to think about it. Not think about it? I repeated, incredulous. I just watched a bartender get thrown across the room by thin air. How am I supposed to ignore that? Iris managed a weak smile. Welcome to Velvet Dreams. The basement. Before I left that night, Sal pulled me aside. You're doing good, kid, he said, his tone unusually serious. Most guys would have quit by now. Why would I quit? I asked, though the answer was becoming painfully obvious. He sighed, running a hand through his slicked back hair. There's history in this place. Things you don't need to know. Just follow the rules and you'll be fine. Rule number 4 burned in my mind. Never, under any circumstances, go into the basement. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The parking lot was empty, but the shadows felt alive, crawling toward me. I drove home with the windows up, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That night I barely slept. The man in black's warning echoed in my head. You'll regret taking this job. By the 5th night, I'd memorized Sal's rules as if my life depended on them, which by now felt like more than just paranoia. The lights, the whispers, the shadows, they all seemed to be ramping up, and the man in black was the cherry on top of this ghostly Sunday. I wasn't sure if the rules were keeping me safe or just postponing the inevitable, but I followed them religiously. When I arrived at Velvet Dreams that evening, Iris was sitting at the bar, nursing her usual water and cracking jokes with the bartender, Mike, who still had a faint bruise on his temple from the incident 2 nights earlier. You're late, Iris teased, her smirk playful. What happened? Stop to wrestle a bear on your way in. Something like that, I shot back, sliding onto the stool beside her. Figured I'd save it for my cardio session. She laughed, the sound cutting through the tension that had been suffocating the club lately. Well, if you're planning on taking on the shadows next, let me know. I want front row seats. I chuckled, but her words hit too close to home. You ever thought about leaving this place? I asked, lowering my voice. Iris's smile faltered. All the time, she admitted. But Sal pays well and jobs like this don't grow on trees. Yeah, but is it worth? I trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the stage, the bar, the air around us, all the things that weren't quite normal. Her eyes darkened. Worth what? Living in fear? No. But it's not easy to walk away. The night passed uneventfully until midnight approached. My chest tightened as the lights dimmed for the usual late-night routine of flickers and whispers. Rule number 2 echoed in my mind. If the lights flicker after midnight, stay where you are and don't move until they stabilize. I stood by the door, gripping my flashlight like it was a weapon. The whispers began louder than before, and this time they weren't just voices. They were names. My name. Tony. The sound was faint, almost melodic, but laced with something sinister. I clenched my jaw, refusing to acknowledge it. Rule number 3 was clear. If you hear whispering and it's not coming from a patron, don't acknowledge it. The whispers grew louder, circling me like invisible predators. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I stayed rooted to the spot. When the light stabilized, I let out a shaky breath and scanned the room. The patrons and dancers looked uneasy, but no one seemed to have experienced what I had. Except Iris. She was staring at me from the stage, her expression a mix of fear and concern. She knew. Around 1 a.m., Sal waved me over from the bar. He was more agitated than usual, his cigar barely clinging to the corner of his mouth. Need you to check the basement, he said, not meeting my eyes. My stomach dropped. The basement, I repeated, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. That's against the rules. Sal scowled. Rules are for regular nights. Something's tripping the power down there, and I need it fixed before the health department shuts us down. I hesitated, the weight of rule number 4 bearing down on me. Never, under any circumstances, go into the basement. But Sal's glare left no room for argument. You're my guy, Tony. Don't make me regret hiring you. With a reluctant nod, I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the basement door, which was tucked behind the bar. The air grew colder as I descended the narrow staircase, the faint hum of machinery growing louder with each step. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of old filing cabinets and broken furniture. The place reeked of mildew and something metallic. Blood, maybe. At the far end of the basement, I saw the power box. I made my way toward it, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. That's when I noticed the scratches on the walls. Deep, jagged marks that didn't look like they came from any tool I'd ever seen. And then the whispers started again. "Tony." The voice was different this time, closer, more insistent. I spun around, my flashlight slicing through the shadows, but there was nothing there. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. Suddenly, the shadows began to move. They swirled together, forming a vaguely humanoid shape that towered over me. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were glowing orbs of pale light, fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking in my grip. "What the hell do you want?" I shouted, forgetting rule number 3 in my panic. The shadow figure didn't respond. Instead, it lunged toward me, its form stretching and twisting in ways that defied logic. I barely had time to duck as it swooped past me, its icy touch grazing my shoulder. Pain flared where it made contact, like frostbite seeping into my skin. I bolted for the stairs, my heart pounding like a drum. The whispers followed me, growing louder, angrier, until I slammed the basement door shut behind me. Back upstairs, Sal was waiting, his expression unreadable. "You fix it?" I nodded, out of breath and still trembling. Yeah, it's done." He patted my shoulder, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Good. Go home and get some rest. You've earned it." I didn't argue. As I walked to my car, Iris caught up with me, her eyes wide with worry. "You went down there, didn't you?" she asked. "I didn't have a choice," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She sighed, shaking her head. "You broke the rule, Tony. Things are only going to get worse now." I didn't sleep that night. The shadows from the basement haunted my dreams, their whispers echoing in my mind. "You'll regret taking this job," the man in black had said. I was starting to think he was right. By the 6th night, the line between reality and nightmare had blurred. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, even in the safety of my home. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Whispers lingered at the edge of my hearing, and the icy pain on my shoulder from the basement hadn't gone away. It left a mark. 3 faint, jagged lines that looked more like claw marks than anything else. I hadn't told Sal about the figure in the basement. I wasn't even sure if he'd believe me, though the way he avoided eye contact when I handed him the flashlight that night told me he probably already knew. The club felt different that night. The usual hum of energy was replaced with a tense quiet. Even the music seemed muted, like it was struggling to drown out the suffocating atmosphere. Patrons shuffled in and out quickly, spending less time at the bar and tipping less than usual. The dancers whispered among themselves, their laughter forced and brittle. Iris approached me during her break, sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. She looked tired, her usual sparkle dulled. "Tony," she began, her voice low. "I heard about what happened in the basement." I frowned. "Who told you?" She shrugged. "Sal doesn't keep secrets as well as he thinks he does. Look, I know you don't believe in this stuff, but breaking the rules has consequences." "What kind of consequences?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of a napkin. "The shadows don't like being disturbed. They're territorial. And they're vindictive." "Vindictive?" I echoed, my stomach sinking. "Like how?" She glanced around, making sure no one was listening, then leaned in close. "A few months ago, there was another guy, security like you. Sal sent him to the basement too. He didn't last a week after that." I swallowed hard. "What happened to him?" "He just disappeared. No one knows where he went. One night he clocked in, and by morning he was gone. His car was still here. but he wasn't. By 11:45, I was already dreading the clock striking midnight. The lights flickered as usual, and the whispers started right on cue. I planted myself near the bar, gripping the counter for support as I followed rule number 2. Stay where you are, and don't move until the lights stabilize. But tonight, the whispers were different. They didn't just say my name, they screamed it. Tony! The sound was deafening, vibrating through my skull like nails on a chalkboard. The lights flared, blinding me for a moment, and when they dimmed again, the shadows were no longer confined to the corners of the room. They crawled along the walls, slithering like living smoke, their forms writhing and shifting. A drunk patron stumbled toward the stage, laughing nervously. "Cool effects," he slurred, reaching out to touch one of the shadows. "Don't!" I shouted, but it was too late. The shadow enveloped him, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. He flailed, his screams muffled by the darkness that wrapped around his body like a cocoon. When it finally released him, he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The crowd erupted into chaos. People screamed, running for the exits, while others froze in terror. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it at the shadow, and to my surprise, it recoiled, retreating to the far corner of the room. Sal appeared, his face pale and his hands trembling as he lit a cigar. "What the hell's going on out here?" "The shadows are getting bolder," I said, my voice shaking. "They attacked a customer." Sal cursed under his breath, his usual composure shattered. "This isn't good, not good at all." "What aren't you telling me, Sal?" I demanded. "What the hell is going on in this place?" He hesitated, then sighed heavily. "The basement used to be part of an old asylum. They did experiments down there. Messed up stuff, brain surgeries, electroshock therapy, things that'd make your skin crawl. When I bought this building, I thought I could handle whatever baggage it came with." "You knew this place was haunted?" I asked, anger bubbling in my chest. "I didn't think it'd be this bad," he admitted. "I've tried everything, priests, shamans, even a damn ghost hunter. Nothing works." I shook my head, disbelief and frustration warring inside me. "And you didn't think to warn me?" "That's what the rules are for," he snapped. "You broke one. Now you've stirred them up, and we're all paying the price." After the club finally emptied out, Iris found me in the break room. She had a first aid kit in her hands and a worried expression on her face. "Let me see your shoulder," she said. I hesitated, then reluctantly pulled off my jacket and shirt, revealing the claw-like marks. They looked worse under the harsh fluorescent light, angrier, darker, almost pulsating. "I knew it," she muttered, dabbing antiseptic on the wounds. "The shadows marked you." "Marked me for what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "For whatever they want," she said, her tone grim. "You're part of their world now, whether you like it or not." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down, I knew she was right. The shadows weren't going to let me walk away unscathed. As I drove home that night, every shadow seemed alive. Every whisper carried the weight of something unseen. Sal's words echoed in my mind. "You've stirred them up, and we're all paying the price." I couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse, and for the first time I wondered if I'd made a mistake by staying. By my 7th night on the job, I wasn't sure what scared me more, the ghost in the club or the idea of quitting. The shadows were relentless, the whispers constant, and every corner of Velvet Dreams felt alive with malice. But something about the place had its hooks in me, keeping me tethered. Maybe it was the money, maybe it was Iris, or maybe I just didn't want to admit defeat. Sal called me into his office before my shift started. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him, pale, exhausted, his usual confidence replaced by an uneasy nervousness. He pushed a drink toward me, but I shook my head. "You're not going to last much longer unless you know everything," he said, his voice gravelly. I leaned forward, trying to mask my apprehension. "Everything like what?" "Like the rules I didn't tell you," he said, lighting a cigar. "Rules for dealing with the worst of it." "Worse than what I've already seen?" I asked, incredulous. He nodded grimly. "First, If you see the shadows circling one person, don't intervene. They've chosen them, and nothing you do will stop it. Second, if the whispers sound like someone you know, ignore it. It's not them. And third, he paused, his eyes meeting mine. If you hear footsteps in the basement, no matter what, don't answer, and don't go down there. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I didn't think you'd last this long, he admitted. Most guys are out by night 4. That night, the club was packed again, and despite the growing dread in my chest, I forced myself to stick to my routine. Watch the floor, enforce the rules, and keep the peace. But as the clock crept closer to midnight, the air grew heavier, the crowd quieter, and the lights dimmer. At exactly midnight, the lights went out completely. The club fell into darkness, the whispers rising like a sinister symphony. Patrons screamed, stumbling over each other as they groped for the exits. The shadows were everywhere now, darting across the walls and ceilings like living nightmares. I stayed rooted to the spot, gripping my flashlight, but this time it didn't help. The beam cut through the darkness, but the shadows seemed to absorb it, growing larger and more menacing. Iris's voice broke through the chaos. "Tony!" she screamed, her figure illuminated briefly by the emergency lights. She was on the stage, surrounded by shadows that swirled around her like a storm. Against every instinct, I ran toward her, waving the flashlight wildly. "Get away from her!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The shadows hesitated, retreating slightly as the light passed over them, but they didn't vanish. Iris stumbled off the stage, clutching my arm as we backed away together. "They're not leaving," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're angry." "What do they want?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "To be left alone," a voice said behind us. We turned to see the man in black standing at the edge of the stage, his expression calm but his eyes cold. "You broke the rules, Tony. Now they're making you pay." Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the whispers. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming from the direction of the basement. My blood turned to ice as Sal's final warning echoed in my mind. "Don't answer. Don't go down there." But the footsteps grew louder, closer, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. Iris gripped my arm tighter, her nails digging into my skin. "Tony, we have to get out of here." I nodded, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The growl grew into a roar, shaking the walls of the club, and suddenly, the basement door burst open. A figure emerged, tall, gaunt, and shrouded in darkness, its face obscured but its eyes glowing with a sickly green light. The patrons who hadn't already fled screamed, scrambling for the exits. The dancers huddled together behind the bar, and even Sal looked paralyzed with fear. The figure moved toward me, its steps slow and deliberate. "Tony," it said, its voice a deep, unnatural rumble. "You've seen too much." Iris tugged on my arm, trying to pull me away, but I couldn't move. The figure stopped inches from me, its breath cold against my skin. "You broke the rules," it said again, and then it reached for me. Before the figure could touch me, a blinding light filled the room. Sal stood behind the bar, holding what looked like an old, rusted lantern. The light emanating from it was warm, golden, and as it spread, the shadows shrieked, retreating into the corners of the room. "Get out of here!" Sal bellowed, his voice commanding for the first time in days. "Go back to where you came from!" The figure snarled but obeyed, dissolving into the darkness as the shadows faded. The whispers ceased and the club fell silent once more. I stared at Sal, my heart pounding. "What the hell was that?" "That," he said, lowering the lantern, "is why I needed you here." The new normal. The next morning, Sal called me into his office again. He looked exhausted but relieved, like a man who had narrowly avoided disaster. "You've proven yourself, Tony," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the desk. "Consider this a promotion. You're the new manager." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Manager? After all that?" He nodded. "You've lasted longer than anyone else, and you've got a knack for keeping things under control, even when it's impossible." I thought about quitting right then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the money, Maybe it was Iris, or maybe it was the twisted sense of duty I felt toward this haunted place. "Fine," I said, pocketing the envelope. "But you'd better give me a raise." Sal chuckled, lighting a cigar. Done. Epilogue. Months later, the shadows still lingered, the whispers still crept in after midnight, and the basement door remained firmly locked. But I stayed. The club became my home, the dancers my family, and Iris. Well, she became more than just a friend. Velvet Dreams was still haunted, still dangerous, but it was my responsibility now. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I was okay with that.